Again, my name is Heather Pedersen. I'm the county's compensation manager, and I also have the pleasure of being the staff liaison to the compensation board for elected officials. Much like the budget committee, this is a committee that is made up of citizen members. I have two of them here with me today. Elisa Grandy served as chair this year. It was also her first year. They do that to the first year members. They make them chair. And and I also have Gary Martin here, who was here last year as well. And I'd like you to talk a little bit, just real quickly, about yourselves and your experience, if you would. Elisa?
Thank you, Heather. So as Heather said, this is my first year on the committee. I am fairly recently retired from a career as an HR generalist, as a human resource director for the Home Depot, supporting the Northwest region. And I've been out of that for a few years, and then have recently started my own business and am enjoying the semi-retirement, semi-work world, and I'm happy to be part of this board.
Hi, my name's Gary Martin. This is my third year on the board. I'm retired also, although I do a little bit of HR consulting. My work experience is in HR. I was the HR director at Portland State University for 14 years. And then I went to the Oregon courts system as the HR director for 13 years and retired in 2011.
Thank you. Our third member who couldn't be here today, it was also his last year, Andrew Loomis. He is an HR professional, compensation background. He worked for Kaiser and now is with Precision Castpart Corporation, and he just couldn't be here today. But I just want to thank you for being here. Oh dear, which one? Okay. So I'm sure several of you have heard this spiel before, but I know you have a couple new members, so I'll describe a little bit about the Compensation Board for elected officials. The Compensation Board for elected officials is guided by Oregon Revised Statute 204.112, which outlines the annual process for county compensation boards and gives these boards authority to review the compensation of elected officials and make recommendations to you, the Budget Committee. The statute provides general guidelines and considerations regarding how the Compensation Board determines their recommendations, which includes the review of comparable positions within the labor market and consideration of factors such as internal alignment and possible compression. The ORS also provides more specific direction related to the sheriff position within the counties and states the sheriff's salary shall be fixed in an amount which is not less than that for any member of the sheriff's department. That's a very broad definition. And so our compensation board has historically interpreted this to mean the sheriff shall make at least $1 more per month than the highest paid under sheriff. And that's been their practice for many, many years. With regard to the methodology of the Compensation Board for elected officials, the methodology adopted by our board includes collecting market data from comparable jurisdictions, mostly in the Portland metro area, but they do look at some other counties within Oregon, and adjusting that data as appropriate. It's my understanding that this budget committee has a few questions related to that methodology, looking back at last year and then this year, and I'm happy to talk about that after the presentation and get into a little more detail.
Yes, thank you.
The labor market used by the Compensation Board includes Clark County, Deschutes, Lane, Marion, Multnomah, and Washington counties, the cities of Portland and Vancouver, and Metro. And this year, the Compensation Board also looked at the Oregon Judicial Department for matches to our Justice of the Peace. The Compensation Board's philosophy has been to maintain elected official salaries within at least plus or minus 3% of the market average. However, this year you'll note that a few of their recommendations are bringing the elected official positions up to the market average, as well as recommendations based on concerns with internal alignment and compression with the second in command within a department. So moving to the recommendations this year. For fiscal year 18-19, the Compensation Board's recommendations are targeted to those positions that have fallen behind market or where there's compression or risk of compression with the second in command within a department. 6 of the 7 elected positions are recommended to receive increases this year. So, county assessor, a 3% increase is recommended for assessor. While the assessor is just 1.8% below market, this increase is recommended due to compression, a compression risk with the assessor's second in command. The second in command is just 0.3% below the assessor. And these recommendations were reviewed and discussed before the retirement of the current assessor. So there is no second in command right now, but I know that there will be at some point again. Just as a reminder, last year, a 4% increase was recommended and approved for the assessor position. This year, the county clerk is 4.6% below market, and so a 4.6% increase is recommended to bring that position up to market. As a reminder, again, no increase was recommended last year for the clerk. This year for commissioner, a 6.4% increase is recommended. The commissioner is 6.4% under market. So last year, the 5.95% increase was approved by the budget committee, which brought the commissioner position up to 3% below market. And that was an acceptable threshold for the compensation board. And I know that's one of the questions you have, so I'll get to that in just a few minutes. The district attorney is 0.6% above market this year. However, you'll note that a recommendation is being made, and this is specifically related to the pay relationship between the second in command, the chief deputy district attorney, whose salary is 1.5% above that of the district attorney. And so what you'll note is, this looks a little odd, there is a 14.5% recommendation for the district attorney. Now, the district attorney is a state employee, and the majority of their salary comes from the state. So the county only has a small portion, about 38% of the full salary of the district attorney. So we can't tell the state what to do with their portion that they pay the district attorney. We can only make recommendations on the county portion. So overall, the compensation board wanted to see a 4% increase in the total compensation for the district attorney. So what that means is we have to adjust the recommendation for the county portion accordingly, which was a 14.5%. Overall, it's 4%, but the county increase is 14.5 to that smaller portion. The justice of the peace is 2.8% below market, so a 2.8% increase is recommended to bring it up to market. Again, just to reiterate, this year a new match was approved by the compensation board for elected officials for the justice of the peace. We're now using the state classification of hearings referee, which is a new addition, a new benchmark classification that we're looking at. This was brought to our attention when Karen Brisbane, the justice of the peace, came and presented some information to the compensation board for elected officials. We looked at the information and analyzed that position and found that it looked like a good match. The hearings referee is a state employee, but they see very similar cases, civil, misdemeanor, evictions, small claims, much like our justice of the peace does, and that can actually fill in for each other as needed. And then finally, a 2% increase is recommended for treasurer. The treasurer is 1.5% below market this year, but there is a compression risk with the second in command treasury manager, who's just 0.9% below their treasurer, so the increase is 2% recommended. Last year, their treasurer received its 2.4% increase, which was approved. So the total fiscal impact of these recommendations annually is, in the coming year, would be about $53,261. So I know you already have questions.
Yeah, I do, and thank you for that. And I don't know if the others do, or if mine sort of encapsulates some of the others. So the thing that concerned me or confused me or whatever was that the methodology seems to change frequently. I recall that 3 years ago, it was a 5% plus or minus that we were using, 5% average plus or minus. And then it went to a 3% plus or minus. And now this year, there are two factors, and I am not sure what the differences in those are. I'd like some explanation on that. Because when I look at this and look at what we've received in the past, the information that we've received, for instance, clerk, the difference in 16-17 was minus 2.8. The ask was 0.8. We provided 0.8. The next year, the difference was minus 6.2 all of a sudden from 2.8. And nothing was asked for that position. This year, it's a difference of minus 4.6, and so we're asking for the 4.6. So it seems there's a huge wide variance in there. And with the county commissioners in 16-17, there was no ask because they were on par with the other commissioners. And then the next year, they were minus 6.7, so we gave 5.95. And this year, they're minus 6.4. So, and then the others are similar also. So help me understand why that,
Good question.
it's a moving target out there
It is a
or
moving
something.
target, and tomorrow it will
I
be
don't
different.
understand it. Yeah, no, I get that.
Compensation is a moving
because
target.
Because of what happens in other counties, obviously, that begins to change things. But it also, it also seems to me that it's kind of like, oh, well, look, oops, this one went up. Okay, so now we'll add this one. I mean,
Right.
help me understand the methodology.
I'm going to start, and then I know Gary will, and Elisa will
Thank you.
will tag in. However, historically, going back, I would say 10 to 14 years, the compensation board, and they were not on it, so that's another reason for the changes, is you have a changing board every 3 or 4
Sure.
years. They have made adjustments to the market matches. So for example, a clerk in Lane County has a much smaller staff, much smaller budget. They don't do elections. The compensation board has said, we really want to have at least 3 matches to our comparable. And in order to use this one as a match, we are going to adjust the pay for that position up by 10% to make it equivalent to our county's position. So they have used that methodology in the past. So some positions and their matches had been adjusted by the compensation board, not an adjustment for PERS or an adjustment for deferred comp, but an added adjustment to either increase or decrease the amount of money because of the size or scope of the comparable position. So year before last, when Mr. Martin came on to the compensation board, he had a question about that. So that was something that the compensation board members looked at. And the following year, they said, please provide us data sheets or market sheets that show with adjustments and without adjustments. So that's what happened last year. We had this transition. We used 2 different data sheets last year. We had data sheets with the adjustments that had been used for years and years. And then we had data sheets that had just clean data with none of those, I don't want to say artificial adjustments, but those adjustments that the compensation board had used in the past. So I believe you all got this handout.
We did.
Okay. So what you're looking at here is for the commissioners, those are the 2 data sheets. The adjusted market data showed the commissioners being 6.7% under market, and the non-adjusted market data, the clean data, showed them being 11.2% under market. So the compensation board last year decided to take an average of that, which was 8.95. That's your average being under market. Knowing that 8.95 is a pretty significant increase to bring them up to market, the discussion was that they would recommend a 5.95% increase, which would bring them up to that plus or minus or excuse me, 3% threshold. Now, this year, we are not using the adjusted data anymore. We're only using that non-adjusted market data. And so we're using the one set of data sheets. So if you really think about last year, if we'd only used the non-adjusted market data, we would have been looking at them being 11.2% under market. They received the approximately 6% increase. This year, we're essentially 6.4% under market. That's what they're recommending as an increase because we've got that one set of data that we're using.
So is there a policy or an expectation of what information will be used going forward and how often, even a percentage plus or minus? I mean, it was 5%, now it's 3%, now
And
it's
that's
also
a reflection
new
of the
data set.
changes within the compensation board and the members of the compensation board. I don't direct them on their methodology. They bring, their compensation experience and their professional recommendations to the compensation board, and that the plus or minus 3% was a change from just a couple years ago. Gary, was that your first year when that change was made, or was it before you?
I believe that when I came on the board, it was 3%
Okay.
plus or minus.
Yeah.
And that's part of our process is during our first meeting, we sit down and we decide what will our methodology be. And in some cases, we're looking at historical approaches, which may or may not have been as successful as we would have liked. And then we decide what's going to be the approach for this year. And even with the same members for next year, some of those things may or may not be the same. Just
Do you also then check with other counties to see what their actual methodologies are so that you're utilizing maybe processes that other counties have also used?
Well, we're a little unique. In the Portland metro area, we have a couple counties that are home rule, so this process looks a lot different than it does here. I actually had the opportunity this year to sit on Multnomah County's salary commission. Again, Multnomah County is home rule, and their salary commission sets the pay. They don't make recommendations to a budget committee. They just set the pay. They do something very similar, though. They conduct a market study. They look at market comparables, but their salaries for elected officials, and they have less elected positions than we do, they're set to where the department directors are. So they have a range that they like to see, and they set them to their internal staff. They don't necessarily use the market. They collect it, but in the end, they set it to the department directors.
So I'm just kind of processing that through my head, and this is not my area of expertise, so forgive me on this. So and this year, as an example, I mean, the sheriff has always been maxed out, just gets $1 more than his next top person. But we also this year have two additional elected positions that are facing compression because of their second in command.
Correct.
And so the idea obviously is, to keep them making a little bit more than their seconds in command. But what you just mentioned, like that Washington County does, sounds like maybe a way to help make sure that compression doesn't occur?
No, because it was Multnomah County, and what they do is their commissioners are set at the minimum of the pay grade for their Director 2 positions, and the rest of their elected positions, their sheriff, their chair, and their district attorney are set at the 75th percentile of their director. So they're not necessarily saying these positions should make more. That's just the value they've placed on those particular elected positions.
Okay.
And in some cases, their elected officials do not make more than their direct reports.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Herbertson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I understand the charge that the Compensation Board has in terms of maintaining market parity. I don't have a big quarrel with that. However, as you're probably aware, and this is the political end of this issue, if you will, and I don't tend to beat around the bush, so we're in the process of negotiating with our unions. We're probably looking at something in the 2 to 3% range. And it just seems to me that it's not, it is not equitable for us to be looking at 6% or 6.4% in a single year. So what would be the consequences of looking at that and saying, okay, roughly the same as what our unions get, divided over a number of years, or applied over a number of years? Would that cause us to fall further behind? Would that complicate the situation? Is that doable in a way that wouldn't complicate the situation in terms of your long-term objectives?
I think Mr. Krupp has a response to that.
It might be helpful to remind ourselves that there's two elements of what happens to an employee's compensation. The one you're talking
I
about
forgot to
is the
mention.
cost of living increment that gets embedded into the labor contract.
Understood.
But it's also true that our employees are also paid within a range, and they increase on an annual basis, an increment through the range. So
Step
at
increase.
typically around 3.5%. In some cases where there's exemplary performance, it might be more than that. So if you're talking about cost of living plus the annual increment in the range increase, you could be talking anywhere between 5 and 6% typically. And then when we do a study for a particular class of position, we will make adjustments to the market for that specific position based upon similar kinds of methodologies that we're talking about here. And if the salary range moves up, then we have a set of rules by which those employees have their salaries adjusted accordingly. So I say that because what we're talking about here is the percentage that applies for the cost of living increment doesn't apply. So.
Oh, but it
Understood.
does.
As a former
does
civil
for the
service employee, I get that. I was just looking at the contract negotiation aspect of things and
here's
the message
adjustment.
that may or may not send to employees and the general public, and that's why I asked the question. Thank you.
So if I can ask another clarifying question on that, then, but the other elected officials do get COLA in addition to whatever increase?
In other jurisdictions?
No, here.
No.
Okay, I didn't think so.
Well,
That's what it looks like.
sometimes the compensation board has recommended a COLA and an adjustment. And this year, the last couple years, it's just been the adjustment up to market.
May I make a
Okay.
couple of hopefully clarifying comments? Two on the methodology and one on our role. On the methodology, it is confusing, I believe, when we talked about the adjustments or non-adjustments, and starting, I guess, last year, in order to make the methodology, I believe, more clear, we felt that the adjustments, which essentially reduced by a certain percentage how much impact a given county had in comparison with us, and we really couldn't find what the basis for those numbers were. For example, maybe it was Multnomah County was reduced by 15%. Well, what's the basis of that? Well, it's bigger, but we really couldn't attach anything that made sense to that. So we thought, let's just find the comparables, and then let's average those comparables and use that as our number, rather than try to over tweak it by giving some less and some more weight. So that's the rationale why we moved from having these adjustments for some of the comparables to just using in most cases, 4 or 5 comparables and averaging those. And then the other thing on the methodology that is kind of a gray area and that we've talked about is we say plus or minus 3% is kind of our goal, But as you'll see, these recommendations this year are to bring the elected officials up to that number rather than 95%, or excuse me, 97%, to bring them to 100%. And so we've had those discussions. Why do we say plus or minus 3%? Why is that in there? If in some cases we're not going to use it. And what we've come up with is we should leave it in there as a goal. And remember, we're just making recommendations here. You all get to decide. But last year's a good example with the county commissioners. The increase would have been so large that we only brought it up to the 97%, thinking that that would be more palatable. Which brings in my third point, our role. We've talked about it. Are we the ones who should consider the politics or consider those other matters? And we've decided, at least I believe, and I think speaking for the other two, perhaps, is our role is to do the staff work as good as we can, as well as we can with the help, and it's really good help that we get from the county staff, and to give you our best estimate on the numbers. And if the budget or the politics don't work out, or the collective bargaining, which may or may not be completed by the time we're doing our work, some years it may be, some years it may not, we have to just give you the numbers and assume that others will consider those other outside factors, because at least I don't consider that to be our role. We're citizens who are doing the staff work, give you our best recommendation, and if the money's not there or the politics aren't right, that's your call.
To clarify my comments, I agree with your approach on that. I don't expect you to consider those things. You're correct. That is our responsibility to figure out. Thank you.
And if I could answer the question about the potential of the solution, a longer term over time, feeding the increases, those increases then become compounded based on all the seconds in command, all the increases that lay out, and it actually becomes a larger discrepancy rather than an evening out if we try to do it over time.
Thank you.
Mr. Feely?
Thank you,
Oh,
Madam
and-
Chair. I guess my question is for Dawn. If the group wanted to delay this decision until, say, the adopted budget process, is that a problem? I don't know when you're looking at getting the outstanding contracts closed down, so.
So we do need a decision from the Budget Committee, then that
The
gets
actual
final
Budget
action
Committee.
by the Board of
So
County
you need it
Commissioners
before
when they
we're
adopt
done.
the
So that it
budget.
can be part of the entire
Correct.
18-19 budget.
Because
Yeah.
we go away after we approve the budget.
We have had contracts that took more than a year, so.
Could the effective date be delayed?
Could what?
Could the effective date be delayed?
Maybe you could do something like that, but I don't think that gets to the heart
Okay.
of the political
I see.
question that Mr. Feely is relating to here.
No, it's cleaner to just deal with it. Yeah, Ms. Caldwell.
Thank you. I appreciate the work that you do and the expertise that you bring to this. I think that's the purpose of having this panel before you, is that they bring the expertise. There's never going to be a year that isn't politically uncomfortable around this issue. And I think, speaking as a citizen, we want to make sure that we have a good quality people who are willing to take these positions. So if I can take some of the discomfort away from this discussion, I'm more than happy to do that.
Mr. Magdalene?
I think if I recall from past history, that there's been some delay in the commissioners in taking raises in the past, and I think it identifies what Don has talked about, and that it looks like you're going to have to catch up someday. And I'm not in the game for politics, so I appreciate the straight answer. And I see no reason not to accept the Budget Committee, the Compensation Committee's report.
Mr. Krupp, did you still have a question? You have your,
Not so much a question, I was just going to make a comment. I would love for you to be able to legally delegate the responsibility of me setting your salaries to me. And I'd take their advice and the recommendation, and I would implement it as recommended to me. And as I've done every year, I've always recommended to this body that we move forward with the recommendation from the compensation board. I do think the concern over time is if we don't keep pace, then
then what
the
happens?
catching up gets harder and harder to do, and the political challenge that we talk about gets even harder down the road. So,
But our time to do that is when we get to the point of adopting the full budget, correct? That's what I thought. I just wanted to double check. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, this is awkward every year, and I think I can safely say I've been here the longest. It's always uncomfortable to do this, but I do think that we should maintain, not just for us, but this is also for the future folks. And I think say that no one here who is elected does this solely for the money. This isn't the point. Because sometimes we get yelled at quite a bit, and it's not always, yeah. And so as uncomfortable that it is, I've been here where it was always an issue. I remember Larry and Bill constantly having issues with it, and Larry would always vote no and then take his raise anyway, and it was glorious, just saying.
Right.
It's awkward and uncomfortable. If there was a way that we could delegate it, I wish we could do that. And can we in any way, shape, or form? I'm tired of this every
But
year.
it is what it is,
I'm just,
yeah. Commissioner Bernard?
Well, we decide Don's salary.
Let him decide ours.
I wish we could, because it's very awkward.
We have for a number of years did not take a raise. I don't have an issue with taking a raise. But what makes it more comfortable is if a citizen makes the motion.
No, we
So,
understand
If
that.
you do that.
I remember that
You know
from the
that.
future. I mean, I remember that from the past. It's
Yes.
always been, yeah. Yeah.
And I remember one year, I donated my raise.
Well, Ken, I think, was
Well-
first.
Oh, Ken, I'm sorry, I didn't notice.
I just,
You're so close to me, I
I
couldn't
kind of
see
wanted
it.
to respond to
Yeah.
Martha's comment, and that was that I just believe in putting those kinds of things right out on the table. Sometimes they kind of go unspoken, and they're lurking underneath all of this. And the reality is that is really what the problem, what the issue is. You have employees who see things a certain way, and you want to be respectful of that bargaining process and how this impacts that. And the public also looking at it and seeing it from that political perspective. And rather than just dance around it, I think it's better to put it out on the table, look at it openly as we are doing today, and then we'll make the decision that we make and suffer the consequences, if you will.
It'll
So,
be what it will be.
it will be what it'll be. So,
Mr. Feely and then Commissioner
Thank you.
Savas.
So I am ready to make a motion, but I'll let Commissioner Savas ask his.
So
Final
but that's my
question.
question
We
is,
did
do
it
we
at
do
this
that at this
time.
point, or do we?
Yeah, we did it last year.
You can't.
Did we? Okay,
Yeah, I did it, in fact.
all right.
But I'll let Commissioner Savas go.
He's
Well, I just want to just piggyback on Commissioner Schrader's history, expression, concerns. And I think many of you have heard my spiel I've done every year. And
Yeah.
I don't,
are we going
wanna-
to hear it again?
and and I just thought, I think what's sinking into me is that it hasn't rendered any results. And it's probably made it more painful for my colleagues. So I'm not going to repeat my spiel.
Okay, thank you,
Good.
Commissioner Savas. All right, Mr. Feely, I will come back to you. I understand you would like to place a motion
I
on the
would.
table.
First of all, I'd like to say, I think it is important to keep up. You just fall further behind. I've been around public sector compensation for, oh God, I'm not going to say how long. But including elected officials. It's hard to bite the bullet. I think in terms of the employees, it's important to put in context that this is your total increase, that you don't get COLA. Because people
That's
will
important.
assume that it's, apples and oranges. So with that being said, as I did last year, I move that the Budget Committee adopt the recommendations as presented today of the Compensation Board for elected officials.
Second.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adopt the compensation board's recommendations as presented. Is there any further discussion?
Yes.
Now you're gonna.
I just want to, no. I'm just going to make a small prediction that we'll be back here next year talking about another increase.
Of course.
Well, I would think so, because it still doesn't bring it up to absolute
Yeah.
parity for 2 or 3 of the positions, including the county commissioners. You took an average where one was at 11%, and then you discounted that average to make it more amenable. Am I correct?
That was
So
last
we
year,
know
yeah.
already it will not be an equal situation next year. We just have to expect that.
So could I amend the motion that we divide Paul's increase?
No, the chair will not accept that. You can't get that one past me. I'm sorry.
Friendly amendment, yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it's the next page
There we
over.
go.
There is a motion on the floor. It has been seconded and discussion has been held. Let's vote on the motion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Please say no.
No?
Okay,
Motion passes. Thank you. Yeah.
thank you.
Special thanks to our compensation board members.
thank you.
for the hard
Yes,
work
that
they
is
do to make this
hard,
come
hard
together.
work, so
By the way, it's good to know that there are people from the private sector serving on that board, not just the
Yeah,
public sector.
it's not-
Oh,
I think
yeah.
that gives some additional
Very much-
credence and
very
validity
credibility,
to the
yeah.
decisions that you make. I think that's important. Many of us have worked in the public sector for our careers, so it can seem awfully self-serving. So I'm glad we have private sector people there.
yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for the time, and thanks for all the, responses to, and helping me understand why it changes all the